If you recall, in the lecture on conservation biogeography, I really emphasized the point that destruction and the introduction of species that are not native to an area as invasives are the two primary movers for endangering and then forcing extinction of native plants and animals. And so we had our discussion of habitat destruction framed around palm oil in the previous lecture. Well, this one I just want to introduce you to a whole bunch of invasive species, and not the usual ones that you think about, some that maybe you're not as aware of. Just because we live in Wisconsin and we don't deal with these things. So this first one here, kudzu. If you've ever been to the southeast, you know about kudzu. There's its name, Poraria lobata. It is a native of Japan. Now think about this. It was brought to America with the hope that it would be a decorative garden perennial in the 1800s. So there it is. That's its first introduction. That would be its human-mediated jump dispersal, the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. It was greatly applauded because of its extremely fast growth, and it makes lovely, fragrant flowers. For a decade there in the 30s, sort of the Depression era, this was a poster child for the Soil Conservation Service. Because it grew so fast, they could plant it. It would quickly cover an area and prevent soil erosion. Now think about the Dust Bowl type area and at that time and what we needed to do. But by the 1950s, this thing was declared a pest by our U.S. Department of Agriculture. The Midwestern artificial populations that helped in the Dust Bowl largely died out, didn't work so well, but the southeastern United States, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, northern Florida, etc., is the ideal habitat for this. And if you've driven around there in summertime, you see a lot of scenes like this, where it looks like this green mass of life is covering everything. And you can get over a foot of growth on an individual plant. This is how fast these things go. They kill native vegetation. It's been called the foot-a-night vine, the mile-a-minute vine, the vine that ate the South. And you can see these problems here. It's growing over power lines, over fences, over any infrastructure there is. It's a big deal. And today we spend, and this is older data here, we spend about $700 million annually to control this thing because it is going wild. So it's bothersome to us, but it is extremely destructive for the environment and the other plants because it stores huge amounts of the carbon that would otherwise be liberated for use for other plants. It stores it in its own area, and it is extremely hard to eradicate. And so I love this picture here. This is just covering everything. So in one sense, this looks good. It looks interesting. But in another, this is a big problem that we have to deal with. And here again, this is an example, overtaking, completely covering a home. Here's yet another one. Another one. You let this thing go, it goes wild. I know some of us, me, you let weeds go a little bit in your yard. No, it's a problem. You got to deal with it. You wait a week on this kudzu, and you've got a big problem. And so now it is part of all kinds of things. To attack this thing, we've sort of adopted a whole idea of using it. Let's use it to make things. And so you see the whole big long list of things where it's used for and dealt with. And so, this is our way to trim it back, use it. And this would be its distribution today. It is growing, but certainly as it reaches its far northern extremes, it's reaching a cold limit. And then as it goes in the west, it's reaching a water or moisture limit. But again, as climate is going to change and get warmer, Kudzu could certainly keep marching up here. Right now, there's definitely no way it could survive Wisconsin winters, but if climate changes enough, it's on its way. The Formosan termite, Coptotermes formosanus. I guess that's how you'd say it. A native to China, Southeast Asia. It made it to Hawaii in the late 1800s by boat, and the same way to Texas in the 1960s. These things are not like your regular termites, which are rather destructive. These are enormous because of their colonial propensity to have giant colonies, million-plus individuals. These things do damage on the order of several $billion yearly. They spread by these reproductive bodies here, and they can do these nice. This is sort of their method of dispersal when they're sort of just dispersing themselves. But they kind of tuck themselves in and ship cargo packing, and they've traveled the world now, and so they're going everywhere. An individual termite can eat multiple grams of wood each day, and in Hawaii alone, these things are having a horrible, horrible effect on both dead and live woods. In the lower 48, not as much of a dispersal, but again, you can see the southeast is a problem. Southern California, basically these areas because of their ports, but in the southeast as well because of their climate. And Hawaii is opportunistic. Nutria, this giant rodent here. This is the koipu, mycocaster. It's an organism that's, it's sort of an ideal rodent for water. It has webbed feet, its eyes are on its head, small little ear holes, etc., etc. Its mammaries are along its back, so its little babies can ride along with mom as she's swimming in the water, and they don't have to be sort of underneath here. They can ride on the top. A big thing, though, is that they have this ever-growing teeth, like most rodents. Here's another sort of picture, example of one of these things, a nutria. Very calm and docile. As you see, you can handle them. They're not a big deal. They're from South America. Down there, they're endangered because of habitat destruction and human use. They're eaten as food. I've eaten nutria in Argentina. It's not that great meat. But they were introduced into Louisiana. Why? Because, we don't have as many beavers anymore, but this is something we can harvest for furs. Unfortunately, as with most animals like this, they escaped their farms. They've invaded wetlands, and they are what we characterize as biological bulldozers. These teeth are their ever-growing, ever-eating machine, and we have no adequate control for these things. But of course, you're in Louisiana and Texas. A lot of guys with guns there, and so we've taken to offer bounties to how many you can kill. And so if you want to just go out and kill them, you can go out and kill them and do a good job with it. And so again, you see here their introduced ranges. Well, again, the southeast, including Texas, it's a big problem for there. But also, anywhere you've got kind of wetlands, they're kind of an issue. We don't really have nutria in Wisconsin yet, but you see they're along this Mississippi drainage, and up here in Minnesota, it's possible we might see these things at some point. Fire ants. If you've ever, any Texan like me knows and hates fire ants, another South American native. This thing came to the United States in the 30s from Mobile, Alabama. They were stowed away on ships. It's very easy for ants like this to hide, especially because they're really small. They're really dinky, but they have super aggressive behavior. I personally have witnessed them in Texas having these elaborate battles with other native species ants, which are much bigger. You'd think they're much bigger, much more ferocious, but these individual fire ants will crawl all over them by the hundreds, and you see their little back abdomen areas stinging, 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 stinging. I personally have witnessed the removal or destruction of so many native ant species and their replacement by fire ants over the 20-year period, say, from the 1980s to the early 2000s. They outcompete all these other groups. This is just a distribution map of the fire ants there in red, and then native ants colonies here in blue, and you see this is slowly but surely migrating across and becoming part of everything. This is just Texas. It's painful. It creates this sort of pimple growth on you, just one little sting. It's not a bite. It's not their jaws biting. It's their butts stinging and injecting this poison. And if you step into one and get, if you imagine sort of 50 of these on your foot or 100 of them on your hand, it is painful. These things actually kill. They can kill livestock. There's actually a couple cases of them killing young people or injured people. Again, huge amount of destruction here. And secondarily, we mentioned this before, they are responsible for the dramatic decline of a lot of the native reptiles, particularly the horned lizards. So here's a poster child that not is known for us here, but down in the Southwest, certainly, the horned lizard or horny toad, beautiful creature. Texas Christian University uses the horned frog as their mascot. These little things ate native ant species. They can't eat or don't eat these fire ants. In fact, fire ants can kill them with their multiple repeated stings. And so these things, because of the fire ants coming, removing native species, native food species for this predator here, means that these things are declining. And so to push this, Texans hate ants. We want to kill them. You have all kinds of ant pesticides and baits and things to do it. I'll be honest with you, I don't know if you can get rid of them. My parents' yard in Texas, you'd have fire ants pop up, build their little mounds. You got to get them out of the yard. You spray poison, every kind imaginable. Every Texan knows what, You go to your local Menards, Home Depot, Lowe's, etc., get this stuff. You knock them out, but in a couple weeks, they're back again. It's just simply that bad. Their dispersal is that important. You can clean your field, kill every queen in your field, but the adjacent field is constantly producing new queens, and they're moving over and trying to bring things with you. Fire ants are interesting in that they are forcing a rapid evolution of these native herpetological species. How do you stop them? The original response for most lizards, if ants are coming at them, close your eyes and sit. Well, that's not good. You get stung, you die, whatever, and so they are slowly learning, many of these species, to twitch, flick, run away. And part of this twitch, flick, run away motion means that there's been a natural selection for species or for individuals, rather, that have longer hind limbs. And so this is a demonstrable case of this invasive species forcing a rapid evolutionary change in a group, these late native lizards, that it has a prominent effect on. Just a picture here of, that's not me. Just somebody stung by this bunch of fire ants. I don't know how this guy let him crawl up on his leg, this mud. Maybe he took a nap in a field or something. Just seeing that is very, very painful. Same thing here, this person's arm. If they get on you, they swarm and they send a signal out. When one of them stings, it sends a chemical signal out to tell all these other ones. They immediately stop and start stinging wherever they're at, and they swarm. Big problem. So when I take students to Texas, I usually try to find a fire ant mound, kick it, and show them. Avoid these things. And then just another example here. Here's sort of the spread of these things. Remember, from the 1930s to today, and they are the scourge of the southeast and then the start of the southwest Texas here. So big problem. How to control them? Well, phorid flies. These things are parasitic on these fire ants in Argentina. They come on them, lay their egg on them, the larvae develops and eats and kills the thing. We've started introducing these things into Texas, as well as a few others. Well, the hope is that this is going to work, but the phorid flies, we don't know that they're going to maintain this relationship. Will they start laying eggs or stinging native ant species or native species that aren't ants? We don't know, but we're so desperate to remove these fire ants that we brought in another human-mediated, non-native species. I certainly hope that somebody that has my position isn't giving his or her class a lecture on the horrible phorid flies which were stupidly brought in the late 1990s to control fire ants. Now they're a bigger problem. I don't know. Just don't know. Anyway, this was just a few examples of invasive species, some different ones than we're used to seeing. The next note set I'm not going to narrate. It's really just on a bunch of Wisconsin aquatic invaders, just for something, just most of you know about these, some of you don't, but go ahead, flip through it and enjoy it just by looking through it.